Welcome to the 11th episode of the Jive podcast. Today, this episode is going to be quite chill and interesting, quite unusual because I have one of my best friends, Kayvon, on this episode. He's a good friend of mine from college. We both went to Amherst College. He graduated from, you were 2 years above me, right? And then you graduated 2022,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
And he graduated a psychology degree, started working in the Fintech company in New York called Ramp. He was a business development associate and is currently account executive in the same company. And we're going to delve more into the depths of what he does, and he's going to speak more on that. But I'm really, really happy to have you on today. I'm really
Yeah.
excited to learn from you and also have a nice episode with my good friend. But you want to introduce yourself in your own words, Kaiwan?
Yeah, man. No, I'm super excited to be here. I think, obviously, I'm a huge fan. I think it's going to be a tall order to live up to. A lot of the esteemed guests that you have on, I feel like I, while I'm really, like, all joking aside, I think before we even started, I feel like this is more going to be an interview about you and all your
Nah,
successes than an interview about
Kaiwan
me.
likes to downplay himself, but he is. There's a reason why he's here. He's a very, and we're gonna talk more about that actually with our questions. And he's one of the most hardworking, talented people I know, and we're gonna more talk more about his work and his industry. I guess without further ado, we can delve into the
Yeah.
question. Which is the question, right?
Yeah, man.
I guess one of the first questions would be like your educational journey and how it has shaped your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, just put on my reading glasses to answer this. I mean, I think on a more serious note, my educational journey has been, I mean, firstly, like just to start off, right? I grew up, I went to a really nerdy math and science school and barely graduated. And I honestly, like, I think, it's a miracle that Amherst even accepted me. I think they honestly saw my name and they were like, you know, I, yeah, I don't know. It's still a mystery to me in my family, if I'm being honest. But all joking aside, when I went to school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was a art history major for like a semester, and then I don't know, just sort of like fell into psychology, I guess, and that ended up being like an interesting switch. I don't know. Like, to be honest, Amherst, I love Amherst. Like, I love the fact that like I could pick my own classes and didn't have to like worry about taking like math or science that I was just terrible at. So that's not a very articulate answer, but I think what I gathered and what I took away is that I think like when you go to like a liberal arts school that's like multidisciplinary, what's really nice is that you have the ability to like chat with professors that are like true experts in their field. And I think, when you're like an 18 or 19-year-old and you have that ability, it's just like a lot less daunting to go, just like to be curious, I think, and to be curious and to like chat with people that are like, again, real experts. And I feel like I remember like an example of that, like my freshman year when I took like a art class or a trip to a museum in New York, and the professor I had at the time was awesome. He was like super interactive. He wore all black. He was like just like had these like intriguing mannerisms and like the way he walked and the way he talked, and was like super serious and like the way he looked. And but just knew everything there was to know about like contemporary art and modern art, and had everybody ask. He taught everyone how to ask really intriguing questions, and it was like magnetic. It was like, even sometimes when the course material was kind of dull and dry, he just had like that ability to like pull people in and like just get them to like care. And I think dive a layer deeper than I think anyone expected. So I feel like when I had like experiences like that, like I'll always remember, you know, how interactive and how open and just sort of what I took away from like those kinds of experiences, which was awesome. Um, but yeah, I know that I sort of like took that a few different directions. It was cool. I mean, I'm honestly didn't know what to expect and felt like I met, my best friends to this day, including yourself there. So yeah.
Do you think that's very interesting? And I think the stuff you say might be applicable in your subject area, but also like if you look at the big picture stuff, right? You can use those skills and apply it in your job, in your professional life too. But I guess looking back, do you think you would do anything differently in terms of your major, your classes, or your experiences, and take a different path, or do you think you would still go with the same?
Yeah. It's a good question. I played this out actually a few different ways looking back now. Because I think I could have probably honestly could have done away with even going to college. Like I know that's kind of a crazy idea.
Mm.
But there's a world alternatively where like what I do, like first maybe it'd be helpful if I gave some context on like what I did coming out of college. Because like what you do as a BDR, which is business development rep, is you basically are paid to bother people all day. I just cold called, cold emailed, just like hounded people. Like if Javi told me no, the way I was taught and trained and the way I trained rep when I was a manager, which I'll touch on later on, was like, you better get 3 no's until they tell you, hey, don't contact me again until like you're ready to let that go. Leave them alone and like move on. Of course, like within reason, right? Like you don't want to just bother somebody to bother them. But in all seriousness, like all it was cold calling and cold emailing. And now could one have taught me that skill like at 18 had I had a sense of like guidance and direction on like what I wanted to do? 1,000%. So like I think college was great, don't get me wrong. Like it was super fun, it was super formative. It gave me a lot of friends that I have to this day. But I mean the job itself, like I could have done right at 18 had I known what I wanted to do. I think what college gave me was like the confidence in myself to be like, okay, now that I have an education and critical thinking skills to fall back on, now I feel comfortable like going out and pursuing something, whatever that might look like. So like, yeah, I don't know. I've like played that back a few times and I'm like, I think there's a world where like I didn't even need to go, to be honest.
Good comments. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
because sales is not. I think like with sales, it's just like you're just curious and you're conversational and you just like talking to people, which I feel like are
Hmm.
you know
Yeah, I feel like for most jobs, unless like they require certain specialized skills, you kind of don't really like. I mean, most jobs you kind of learn on the job, right? Like even if you think about investment banking or consulting, right? You just have to have obviously the knowledge, the critical thinking, the ability to kind of like manage different things. But you most of the jobs you learn on the spot. But do you think there's like a even if for your kind of roles, especially like in fintech, in good companies, do you think there's like an entry barrier if you don't come from like a certain like a college background? Like somebody might be a great salesman, but if they don't have a college degree, do you think there's like a kind of like a barrier for them to even like get to the door to get their resume in?
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think with like a role like a BDR, you just sort of earn your stripes. Like the only barrier to entry is like are you not willing to be a psycho at this for like the next year? Like I swear,
Mm.
I swear to you, it's just like it's a grueling role for a reason. Like your job, again, as it sounds, is you gotta like earn your way to the top. Where you might like I was sending like 1,000 cold emails a day, like doing cold calling on top of that sometimes, and like you just sort of like, all right, like this is how it's going to be for like the next however long in order to like work my way up to like whatever else is next, right? So I think I think honestly, uniquely, like you don't have to be some like wizard or have the highest GPA or be some stud student. None of those things applied for me ever, by the way. I just like, I was just sort of like, I think there was a point where I was just like, I don't want to be a student after college. So, I have like a lot of energy and excitement to like apply that to something that I can get really curious and good at. And that just ended up being like where I fell.
And you kind of work at Ramp, right? So tell us about, I guess, Ramp, your role there. How did you start it? What's your current responsibilities are and
Yeah.
objective?
Yeah. So when I joined, that was as a BDR, which, like I touched on, is basically your sourcing leads. So basically, we think about like the sales process as like a funnel. The top of the funnel is like lead, like outbounding, essentially, which means Javid isn't a customer. I'm gonna reach out cold to Javid to try and win him as new business. So I book Javid. Let's say Javid is like, all right, Kayvon, I'll take a meeting because you sent some amazingly tailored email. Never the case, but we're saying this hypothetically. We would like to then meet together. So I book that meeting and then I pass it to an account executive who actually takes that call, has a conversation, says yay or nay on whether or not we'd want to move forward as like new business, basically. So that's what I did for like a year, was just like sourcing the meetings for other people to take, and then managed a team that did that after about 9 months. And then recently, like 5 or 6 months ago, I made the jump to management 5 months ago. And then now I'm an account executive, which means take that meeting and try and close it as new business. There's some nuance there, but like that's the like high 30,000 foot overview.
I see.
Yeah.
And you are from, I know you personally, so I know you don't want to talk about that stuff, but you're recognized as one of the top sales performers at your company. So what qualities do you believe are essential for success in sales, and how do you cultivate relationship with key stakeholders, both within and outside of your organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, it honestly just boiled down to like two things. One, just having like and I don't even think like, I was the best, or this or that, to start off. I think just for me, the mentality was be humble, work super hard. And I think my North Star is always just like someone like a Jocko Willink or a David Goggins, someone that just has this like mentality of just extreme ownership and accountability, right? Like, I'm coming into a role, I got to prove myself. Nobody gives a shit about me, excuse my French. So I got to earn my stripes in order to be here, in order to be successful. In a sales role, right? Like, it is eat what you kill. If you tell me go out and perform up to a certain standard, up to a certain quota, and I miss that expectation, to me that's like a reflection of like my own lack of preparation and my lack of willingness to put it all out there in order to get to where it takes. So I think for me, like, it wasn't, and it's still like, the new role I'm in is fairly new. And, in some ways I'm wiping the slate clean, but I'm trying to apply the same principles around just like hard work, effort, and working with intention. And I think you just have to be relentlessly positive and be curious. Because if you're not, you're always like focused on like the biggest areas you failed at, you're going to get in your head. And when you're in your head, it just ends up going to, spiral and this or that. So you always just have to be like a forward center of mass, looking forward and having a bias towards action and knowing where to apply that appropriately. Because, yeah, I don't know, that in a nutshell is sort of like been my mentality coming in, I think.
How do you, I guess, I mean, I probably have that somewhere down the line in the questions, but I'm curious from what you just said. It still takes a lot of like skill to be able to talk to people and convince them, right? And
Totally.
You're faced with so many different reactions, and some of them probably not very pleasant, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
How do you how do you like deal with them? How do you navigate them? And how do you kind of get better at just like really talking to people, you know? Because
Yeah.
not everybody's born with that skill, right? Like not everybody, even if you're talented, it still takes a certain, way of talking and speaking to people to be able to sell a product. So, I guess what's your approach to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think EQ and like social awareness are things that I'm working on because I think right now, to be honest, like I'm a small fish in a big pond. Like
Mhm.
it's a new role. It's one
Mhm.
that like I'm not familiar with, and I know to be totally candid, I suck right now. Right, like I'm hot garbage. Do I accept that as like the future state and like where I want to be? Absolutely not. Like I'm going to work super super hard to make sure that like I have my ducks in a row. But right now, oh my gosh, I could tell you this past week on like 3 customer calls where I was just like, oh my gosh, because all of our calls are recorded. So you go back and you re-listen and you're like, who is that idiot that just like I had one guy literally tell me at the end of the call, he's like, yeah, I appreciate that. None of what you showed me was relevant to my business and really what I'm looking to accomplish here. So yeah, imagine that happening from a CFO of some huge company you're trying to close, and you're like, so you're like that's not great. You just sort of choke up and you feel embarrassed. You're like, oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
know. And the hardest part is almost like
Mhm.
resetting yourself because that might call might have been an hour, but guess what? You have another 8 hours of calls you have to take, and if that's in the back of your head, you are going to mess up every single one after that.
Mhm.
So you got to always treat it like, all right, I'm back in saddle. Like I'm treating the next one just like nothing ever happened, and I didn't just freaking embarrass myself out there. Um, and I think for right now, like I just have to accept the fact that like there is a steeper learning curve. There are certain areas that I can like really focus and hone in on in order to get better. Because at the end of the day, like everybody has their own weakness. So I'd be a fool to be like, I'm gonna get better at everything all at once. Versus like I'm gonna tailor what I'm gonna get better at and be super intentional about getting better at like 2 or 3 things in a given week. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because right now, like I re-listen to my calls and I'm like, this is just no wonder no one wants to buy anything from me. You know what I mean? I think the social awareness piece that you brought up, like I'm still trying to figure out. Like negotiating is hard, especially when it seems like you are trying to get someone to buy something. But I had a breakthrough like on yesterday. Basically, it was like a 6 p.m. call that I took, and I was super calm. Like it was just like start of the weekend. I'm like, hey man, like I'm shooting the shit with this guy. He's a co-founder of the SIG company. Like just like treating it like I'm being calm, I'm being curious, I'm being uh, conversational, and that conversation ended up going great because I wasn't trying to think like
Yeah.
I'm trying to sell him,
Yeah.
close the deal. You're
Yeah.
like, we brought it up in a joking way. Who's that guy that's like, oh, my close, close this deal, bro? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if
Yeah.
you have that mentality, you're like, I'm a closer. It's
Yeah.
like you come off as cocky and no one wants to buy what you're putting down. So I just feel like that. I don't know. I know very little about very little things, but what I'm trying to focus on right now is like just tailor what I need to get better at right
Mhm.
now because there's no time to waste in order to like get where I need to be.
What you said is quite fascinating. I think that happened to me too with interviews, right? Sometimes you take interviews like super seriously and you just like slip up, you make a mistake. But on some interviews, you're like, you know what, I'm gonna just go and see what happens. And you actually end up doing quite well. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a weird like paradox where like when you're calm and you kind of don't care, you obviously care, but you just like you have that attitude naturally. You end up performing actually quite better. Um, my question to you is you said like, okay, like one call didn't go well, it was quite embarrassing, you move on to the different call. How do you dissociate from that? Like, as for me, if something like goes horrible, I'm like, it's playing in the back of my head, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, like I keep thinking about it. I'm like, oh, what I could have done better, blah, blah. How do you just like, you're like, okay, this stays there and move on to the next one? Like, how, that takes a skill. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's usually like an inner conversation you have with yourself. Like
Mm,
mine is usually like that was hot garbage. You should be
mm,
ashamed of what you just put up. I honestly can't believe that just happened. Make sure that doesn't happen again, because you look like a dumbass out there. All right, make sure it doesn't happen again. So with that said, like it's that, right? Like in sort of like a stern way, and then what becomes more lighthearted and where it becomes more positive is like, okay, like now that now that we acknowledge that didn't go well, right? Showing some level of self-awareness, what can we get better at to ensure that doesn't happen again? And I think what I do to just sort of get back on the horse, so to speak, is like use it as fuel to the fire. I'm like, that's one person that didn't want to like acknowledge me or have any buy-in. Like to me, I take that, like some people are like, oh, I don't take it personally. It's like, no. I take it personally. I take it really personally. If anything, I'm like, that is a reflection of myself not being prepared and being thoughtful and being diligent. So I got to make sure that I'm bringing all three to the table next time. Otherwise, it's just going to happen over and over and over again. So I've honestly felt like when I come in prepared, like if I do an hour, 30 minutes of research, and this might sound like overkill, but like a ton of research you do yourself ahead of a call. Granted, I don't always have time to do this, but the more preparation I do, the better prepared that I feel coming in, the more confident, I am when I'm like in the zone. And then from there, it's just like the jazz of like the questions and like the back and forth that comes from the conversation. So yeah, but rejection, I just take it. It's almost like fuel to the furnace. I'm like,
so it doesn't damage your self-esteem.
I think I don't. I can't let it afford to damage my self-esteem, because if it does, I'm like screwed. Like that's it. Like you don't have anything much more than like confidence and discipline and being goal-oriented in sales, or otherwise, I'm gonna get eaten alive, and I'm not just gonna let that happen. So
that's fair.
Yeah.
Actually, we never talked about what ramp is, like what ramp does. So you're gonna talk about that too briefly, and also I think one thing I'm curious about, because like obviously sales is sales, and it's like the idea behind it is same regardless of the industry. You're trying to sell a product to a buyer, right? But I'm wondering how the sales methodology, like what do you find the most effective in tech startup setting, and like can you explain like why it works so well, especially in a tech startup scene, right? And another thing, I guess I'm asking too many questions, and we can kind of like take, you can ask me again if you didn't remember, but you're meeting with so many different companies on one day. You have back-to-back calls. You always have to have some knowledge about those companies, right? Like, because you can just like walk in without having any understanding of the company. How do you manage to like do research for all those, at least briefly, before all those calls, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll maybe take like the first question, Chris, and then we can snowball from there. Yeah, because I think when if I'm remembering correctly what you'd ask, because I have to say these questions are just phenomenal.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can tell. I mean, we're talking about preparation, but look, I mean,
come on, I'm blushing.
I'm paling comparison. But no, I'm serious. I was gonna say you're doing sales right now. You're like summarizing. You're being thoughtful. You're like, playing. There's a back and forth.
You guys have any vacancy?
I'm sort of sweating over here. I'm like, he's coming. If there's any positions open, I know feeling it.
I appreciate that.
I got you.
That's just a reminder for the question. The first one would be like the sales methodology you find most effective.
So yeah, I mean,
in tech startups,
I should be super prescriptive in saying like this is a methodology that I'm learning, right? Like I'm no expert, right? Like I know very little in starting this new role, but with that said, right, like really where I'm trying to tailor my efforts and like I think just like honestly become like much more focused on is basically around, I think a series of just basically being a lot more intentional with like how I am structuring my calls. And what I mean there is the methodology that like one might be familiar with is like a MEDIC methodology, which is like pretty universal across a lot of sales and tech teams, which MEDIC is just a sales framework essentially, where you're having a conversation with the buyer and you're trying to get an understanding of how decisions are being made, what core challenges or areas of pain that they might be dealing with. If you're able to quantifying those areas of pain and understanding like internally what it would take, right, to make an internal decision. What other stakeholders are involved? What does the timeline look like? How soon would they be looking to make a change? What's the impact that everything you've discussed up until this point is having on the business overall? So there's a lot that you're hoping to uncover in like 30 minutes, basically. And I think part of that just comes back to what you touched on earlier, which is just ruthlessly and rigorously preparing ahead of a call. Where if you're speaking to a CFO or you're speaking to a controller, which are the two personas that at Ramp uniquely we sell into, you got to understand like who else is on their team. You got to understand what industry they're in. You got to understand what's going on at their company right now. Are they growing? Did they just release a product? If they're an e-commerce business, have they just gone through a merger, right? Like, are they thinking about adding on branches, new departments? What does their structure of their finance and accounting team look like? Is it lean? Is it much bigger? So that you can start to think about like, how am I going to build a hypothesis around what this person cares about coming into the call? Do they have a lean team and they're focused on hyper growth, right? So they're thinking about, hey, we're probably going to outscale a lot of the systems that we have in place. Where, because I'm running a one-man show right now, a lot of the challenges that I'm dealing with that are highly manual are falling on my plate. And ideally, I'd like to find a technology like a Ramp to help automate, streamline, and drive a lot more operational efficiencies around my current state. So that, I think, like I said, I think it just goes back to understanding the business, understanding the industry, understanding the persona that you're selling into, and framing things in a way that's different depending on how they found out about Ramp. Because if Job had found out about Ramp because he entered his name on our website and he's intrigued based on research he had done prior, I'm going to treat that call differently than if Kayvon, the SDR, reached out to Job on a cold call and was like, take a meeting. This is what we do, and called you over and over and over and hounded you until you finally got on a call with me. Because if you hop on in that scenario and I ask, what interested you to hop on the call today? You're going to kick my teeth in, because what got you interested to hop on a call is frickin' Kayvon, the SDR, called him 10,000 times and wouldn't take no for an answer. So there's more of an educational piece that you have to like bake in as a primer to the conversation, as opposed to an inbound lead, right? Just use the terminology when like you express interest, you come in, and I can dive straight into like a line of questioning around what's prompting your interest, what's going on with the business to make this a priority, etc.
That's very interesting. And how do you balance like research for so many different companies you get in touch with? Because like you don't have a lot of time because you're taking calls and talking to them. So when do you do the research for most of them?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. It's like at the end of the day where it's like, your next day you might have like 7 to 8 calls back to back. And you're like, ideally that isn't the scenario, but like there was a day this past week where it was. It's like, all right, let's strap in and make some shit happen. So basically it's just like I think just block off like 30, 45 minutes and you just go down the list and try and prioritize like, what I'm starting to figure out. And I've literally been in seat for like a week and a half now, right? So keep that in mind. But already it's like, there are certain people that will never buy whatever you have to sell based on they're not big enough pain, or they're just not having challenges around like the product that you're trying to compel them to buy. And so you cut your losses there early. If they hop on and they're like, it's okay, like, we have tooling that we've used for a while and, we probably will make it, like, people that are discerningly like, or like just like they're not, they're in this like state of ambiguity as to like whether there would be a compelling reason to switch or not. And after asking like a few pointed questions, if you can't get to there being like a clear and apparent need, it's just better to be like, listen, like halfway through a 30-minute call, Javed, I totally respect your time. Like there wouldn't be a fit here. Like being disarmingly blunt, where time is better spent instead of like trying to allocate my time across 100% of deals that might be given to me. I focus in on the ones that I know based on the pre-call research that I do, I can actually win. And I confirm that throughout the conversation, right? So I do the preparation, I come into the call, and I pressure test some of the hypotheses that I built across Java being on a lean team, across there being hyper growth and probably outscaling the systems that are in place, and try and confirm or deny whatever hypothesis I have so that, again, we can have a more pointed and tailored conversation. And I can actually determine, would there be a fit here or am I wasting my time and their time, So that's how I would make a structure, think about it. A bit of a ramble.
No, it's you're answering my question. So when you cold email or cold call people, how do you differentiate between no's, right? Like when you get a first sales call, you're probably your natural instinct is to be like, no, I'm good, thank you, right? So how do you differentiate between no, I'm good, like actually, no, I don't need it, and no, I'm like, but like if you keep kind of like be keep being persistent, they might change their mind. Like how do you because you've been in the business for a while now, so how do you differentiate that, or is there a way to differentiate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with cold calling, it sometimes it's just like if you talk to somebody and before you even pitch them on what your product is, some
Mm-hmm.
people just aren't. You just sort of realize like some people just aren't receptive to cold calls, just like some people
Mm-hmm.
aren't receptive to cold emails. You hop on the phone with some of these people and it's like they're like, "How'd you get my number?" And take me off your list. And it's like this is the 21st century. Like I don't really know what to tell you. Like I'll remove you. I'm happy to do so, but like you're not willing to entertain this as a conversation. Where my line was always, "Oh, you won't take a cold call? Well, do you prefer a cold email instead?" and so like you have fun with it, right? Like some people just are too serious. And but that said, like if I have a conversation with you, I'm like, "Hey, Javed, after doing some research, I noticed that you've been with the Alizada podcast for a little over a year. It's so impressive, by the way, to see like I'm really talking you up and beefing up your ego. And you're like, this guy did his research. He's not Joe Schmo." And I'm like, listen, like in speaking with a ton of other podcast hosts, more often than not, what we hear that folks tend to struggle with is that, as they continue to garner more success, they deal with X, Y, and Z. Curious to the extent you run into any of that. So you open it up by asking an open-ended question around a core challenge that they may or may not be dealing with, and you let them steer the conversation. And listen, like a cold call is more tricky because you have 5 minutes to paint the picture on a challenge that they might be facing, educate them on the product that you're selling, why it's differentiated, and compel them enough to hop on a call while also getting additional research so that you can pass to an account executive to lead a more tailored conversation. So as an example, if you're like, all right, Kayvon, you won't take no for an answer. I would absolutely love to take a meeting. And I'm like, great. Like, just so you know, I want to make sure I'm being as impactful as possible in a further conversation. Here's what, ahead of that conversation, do you mind sharing with me, like what you guys are using across, if I'm selling like a podcast tool, whatever, right? Like what you guys are using today for your podcast, technology, whatever that might look like. That was a horrible example, but like you get the point. I think there obviously there are two roads one goes down. You paint the picture on a challenge and you bring a story across like what other teams face and get them to open up based on the success story that you've shared. Or they say, "Hey, I'm not interested." And then you lead with an outcome, right? You say, no, I'm not interested. Like, Javid, I totally understand. Like, for what it is worth, more often than not, a lot of teams that leverage a system like a ramp, right, are able to add 4% to their bottom line and help speed up their process of month end by as much as 5 times. I know that would be of interest. How would I be able to earn your time to demonstrate that? So you ask an open-ended question that's tied to a desired outcome.
Mm.
And in saying that, a lot of people are like, oh, no, like I'm not interested. In that case, it's like, all right, that's totally fine. I'm not going to waste my time with that person. But if sometimes you open up the conversation and people bite and are like, yeah, all right, like, listen, I'm just busy right now. I'm tied up with, if I'm an accountant, month end or audit or tax season, right? Whatever it might be. Then you could be like, I totally get that. Would definitely love to just hop on a conversation if you'd be open and then lock something in for like another date. So you're just trying to figure out, is it timing? Is it low bandwidth because of an internal strategic initiative they might be focused on, whatever that might be. Yeah. So that's sort of what I would say.
So, do you use any particular technologies that, I know technology plays kind of a critical role in modern sales strategies. Can you like share an example of a tool or software that really made a significant impact on your team's performance, your performance, or just been really helpful in your?
Yeah, totally. I think there are a few. I mean, like, Orem is a pretty like awesome tool. It's basically a parallel dialing tool, which means you load up a list of like 1,000 contacts. And for a bit of context, the way that we get that information is through a tool called ZoomInfo. ZoomInfo is a lead scraping tool, which basically lets you see, God, as much as you probably wouldn't want this to be out there, if I go on LinkedIn and I use toggle on ZoomInfo as like a Chrome extension, I can pull your phone number, I can pull your email, and I can load that into a tool like an Orem, which will populate a list of prospects' phone numbers and basically let you call 6 people at a time. So I can mow through and have, if you can imagine, right? Like you could have like hundreds of conversations a day, pretty much. Because as soon as 5 people hang up, 1 person picks up. So you don't have to be like manually on your phone, like, whatever. Just like going one by one. You can literally go as fast as humanly possible, just like mowing through it. So that tool has just been a super big game changer because, you can obviously do a lot in a really short period of time. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a perfect example of just when I saw the technology, I was like, holy cow. The only caveat is that cold call meetings and email meetings are night and day difference. Like cold calling, you might hop on because you're like, he wouldn't leave me the hell alone, right? He kept calling me like, for the love of God, I took the meeting. Just stop it. You get a lot of that. But cold email, you do your research, you chat with a colleague, you come back to the person, you're like, this is compelling. Let's set up a time to chat. So it's a lot stickier. All intents and purposes.
That's really cool. Do you like with the emails? Do you because like sometimes you email somebody and they like see the email and they forget about it. Do you send them like how do you time your emails? Do you send them like one email and then like a few days or a week or so you send another email, or like how does that work? Because they don't get back to you.
I used to just like hound people. Like I used to email people every 2 days. I used the responses sometimes were like, please, they're just insane. Like, because at the end of the day, like some people, like my approach is always just like, if I'm reaching out to like a list of 50 e-commerce companies, they're going to know my name and they're going to know it for about 2 weeks. Like, you better believe that. I'm going to be emailing them. I'm going to be calling them. I'm going to be doing whatever it takes to get like a hold of them and compel them enough to like chat. Because all I got to do is get them interested enough. So like I used to send emails that were like, I saw that we're both Iranian. I'm hosting a Persian event for our head of sales, and we're making kebabs and rice, and my grandmother just sent feta cheese from Arizona. Like all this, like all this stuff to get them, intrigued because it's an attention economy, right? Like these guys are getting bombarded in their email inbox from like all these different reps trying to sell them something, whatever to like try and stand out and get them like intrigued enough to like respond, to just sound like a human and not like a bot, right? Like ChatGPT that wrote this email that sounds like a robot wrote it, right? You want to make it sound like there's a person on the other side of that. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that was the biggest takeaway,
Yeah.
honestly.
So, like, as you advance, I mean, currently you already mentioned, but as you advance in your career, you've taken on leadership roles, right? Including managing a team. How do you inspire and lead your team, and particularly during like challenging times? And how do you approach leadership overall? Like, how's your approach to leadership?
It's a great question. Honestly, I should say again, I'm really grateful for the experience. I think my approach was probably inspired by like one, having great mentors like early on. Like I was lucky enough to have a manager when I first joined that's like he's one of one. Like he's just excellent at everything that he does and always commanded the same for everyone on his team. So I think his approach was always extreme ownership and accountability, which I took away, learned from not only him, but following like thought leaders like Jocko Willing, who are always like, you take extreme ownership and you take extreme accountability. And the purpose of me saying that is like he always uses the anecdote of, for a bit of context, right? For like the listeners, right? It's like he used to be a Navy SEAL. He led a platoon in Ramadi and on a bunch of other
Operations.
operations. Yeah, thank you. And basically, like an example of where he demonstrated that was the chain of command that the highest up basically was going around a room, all the commanders, Jocko included, and Commander A was like, the head of command was like, hey, what do you guys all need, right? Like, I want to make sure that you guys are squared away. Commander A was like, hey, like, I need more helicopters. Commander B was like, our Wi-Fi broke. We can't catch the UFC game tonight. And Commander C, who's Jocko, was just like, I don't need anything. I'm good to go. Thank you. And so when you are always have that like chip on your shoulder that like, I'm going to figure this out for my team, and anything that goes wrong is a reflection of my poor mentorship, leadership, and guidance, then that trickles down and has an effect on the people that you lead, because they see, okay, Kayvon's taking extreme ownership and it is commanding the same from everybody else on the team to ensure that nothing ever falls out of line. And that was something that like I tried to instill early on alongside, principles from a book I read called The Score Takes Care of Itself, which another mentor at Ramp inspired me to read. It basically is about the fact that, and it's written by the coach of the 49ers who took them to 4 Super Bowls, basically. He took them from the worst organization in the NFL to the best in under a year. And so he just chronicles like how he was able to do that. And it, just runs through like his just stories, right? Like of always going back to, you focus on the inputs religiously that will make you a champion in the long term. If you just focus on getting better at 1 to 2 things that are the biggest gaps and weaknesses in like your performance, the score will take care of itself. But if you're always worried about like what the score will be, you'll never get better, because you're constantly just have that anxiety of not being good enough and not living up to the expectation of where you need to be. So his thing was always like, I'm going to break it down really simply in terms of concrete goals that each individual person on my team has to accomplish. And if everyone has something that's tailored to them and focuses on that for every day for a month, we're going to get a lot better, a lot quicker. Instead of, I'm going to give everyone the same playbook and tell them to work on the same thing. And for some people that might resonate, and for some people it won't. So he was just like a natural born teacher and leader, and knew what Java needs from me isn't the same as what Kayvon needs from me. So I need to tailor things appropriately and, ultimately give each person what they need at any given point in tailored format. So I think, again, pretty long-winded, but like I'd say like those were the two books or like methodologies that like inspired me the most.
So essentially, if to summarize, like it's kind of like a team is like a machine, and every part needs to do its kind of like a job really well, and then the machine works perfectly at the end.
Totally. Yeah, that is Yeah, and I think like when people, and also just being human, right? Like I think, you know, like things will always come up if you just sound like what I needed to teach myself is that if you just come off as a hard-out military commander and how you like approach every situation, nobody is gonna want to work with you or
Mm.
for you because you just sound like, you know, like it just sounds unreasonable to people. Like, unfortunately, most people are irrational, highly emotional creatures. We're not like these rational robots that are like, I will do, to Kayvon's bidding every single day. It's like
Mm.
never going
Mm.
to be like that. It's always going to be like, this is what I want. This is, so you always just try and fall back on like, and leaning back on aligning their future goals with their current performance to ensure that like if our North Star is you getting promoted in a year, what are the steps that we need to action right now in order for us to get there? Because if they don't have the buy-in or know that you as the manager have the buy-in to get them there, they're not going to work hard. Like if I my approach was always like I'm going to make this the last BDR role that you ever have to be in. That said,
Mm.
I'm going to need your unflinching effort and resolve in order to like put in the work needed to get there.
I see. And when you get like new people in your team, right? Like transitioning into a new team is always kind of a challenge. It can be quite daunting experience. So from your perspective, what strategies can both team managers and people like the team new members employ to ensure a smooth integration and efficient learning process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you mean like in terms of managers to like come in and like learn and like nurture their team appropriately, or you more so mean like the people on those teams?
So it's like you've been on both sides of things, right? So you can speak on both sides.
Yeah,
But I'm curious. Also, I'm curious from both perspectives. But also, I was wondering, like, you get a new person on a team, and some people have been on your team for a while now, but this is a new person, so it's going to be some time, some learning process. So how do you make it? What can both team managers do and the team members do to make the process as smooth as possible? So the learning, the adaptation, the integration,
yeah.
as smooth and efficient as possible.
I think the first thing is we just chatted through, right? Like, what are your goals and that you're trying to get out of whatever journey you're about to start, right? Do you want to be in sales at all? Do you want to be in product? Do you want to be in engineering? And so for some people, you'd be surprised. Like they're like, listen, like I'm here to really prove myself that I'm capable of excellence, but I actually probably don't want to end up in sales. And you have that conversation early on. You get them to open up, and you build trust up front, so that we're like almost like a social contract where they're like, okay, great. Like now that we both signed off on this, where do I need to focus in order to get there? And then you work with them. And this is what I tried to do. And, you know, candidly, like wish I had done with every rep as soon as they join is like building out a plan of attack for like the next 90 days on where we can best tailor and focus our efforts so that you're making sure everything is like where it needs to be in order for you to get there. And yeah, I mean, I think in me saying that, like even I didn't even realize that until I was like a month, like halfway through the role, to be honest, looking back now. Because I thought you just joined a team and you figure it out, and like every team is like a living, breathing organism. It
Yeah.
has a culture, it has a identity. If it has none of that, then it's just like everyone is siloed, almost doing their own thing with no like coherent or concrete purpose. And so that was another area that, like, to be candid, I struggled with and had to like orient myself around because I thought again, just starting off, it was like, okay, like we have 3 or 4 people on my team now. Like, well, they know what the identity is. I don't have to like tell them. It should be known, right? Like this is what's expected of them, etc. But even something as simple as just reiterating it over and over and over again
Mm.
in like a meeting format where like what is our identity, what is our purpose, why are we all here, gives people like some sense of direction on, yeah, like this is what's expected of me in order to like so long as I'm here, like live up to the expectation of performance and what I should expect of myself.
Makes sense. So how do you like navigate the feedback process, right? Because like sometimes feedback necessitates kind of like a shift in your strategies and approach, right? Um, so how do you, when you give feedback or when you receive feedback, how do you navigate that process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I honestly think the voice in my head is always like it's never good enough. Like whatever you're working on, never gonna be good enough. Like ever gonna be good enough. And like honestly, like I actually think it's a good thing because like it softens the blow when other people come to you and are like that was terrible. That meeting was terrible, Kayvon. Or like they come up to you and they're like, you know, we need to improve and action this. Like I always take it as like, listen, like if multiple people, and this would happen, right? Like multiple people on my team would come to me and be like, why are we not doing this? I'm like, that's a great question. Like, why are we not doing that? We should do that. You guys are both coming up to me and being like, this is a problem. Problem A needs to be addressed. Let's address it.
Mm.
I'm not gonna have an ego and be like, oh, I'm offended that this person came up to me and said that. I'm like, you guys are right. I candidly wish I caught that earlier, because had I caught it earlier, I wouldn't have 3 people coming up to me and saying that like this should have been addressed earlier on. So
Mm.
the feedback portion was something that I think just allows one to iterate and get better and better and better much more quickly. Because if it's the same thing right now, like if my manager, this has happened already, comes up to me and is like, what the hell was that? We got to make sure we don't do that again. I'm like, Roger that. You're damn right. The next time I'm given the opportunity to hop on a call and in a similar scenario, I won't make that same mistake again. And if you have that level of just like, listen, I'm here to learn, I'm here to get better, and I'm not going to have an ego about it. Because that's the thing. Like some people come in, and I'm not saying people that I directly manage, but to just have this thing of like, David told me this. Oh, why did he tell me that? I'm not going to do that. Like that. I'm not in the wrong. I'm in the right here. It's like when you have that level of dogma and like hard headedness, you're not gonna. How can you progress and how can you get better if it's always just like a level of, you know?
My follow up question would be, how do you discriminate between like feedback that's meant to help you and a feedback that's just kind of like trying to attack your self esteem? Because not everybody, and I'm not talking about your company or your business. I'm talking about like in general. Not everybody's there to not everybody wants to help you or wants to see you improve, right? So some feedback is kind of like something is disguised as feedback, but it's meant to actually kind of like hurt your
Totally.
ego or like hurt your self-esteem. How do you discriminate between those kinds of feedbacks?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that is an area that I think I can quickly pick up on. Like I think I have enough level of self awareness to know if somebody is telling me something,
Mm-hmm.
like based on the tone, based on the context. Are they saying that to help me, or are they saying that to get in my own head and like try and
Mm-hmm.
mess with me? And I'm not saying like I've been put in that scenario necessarily, but I think like when someone is coming up to you and being like, I think to me when the difference is if somebody just says something to you without a concrete goal or outcome that one can work towards. Like if someone comes to you and is just like that was pathetic.
Without giving you like certain
Yeah,
specific.
that was pathetic because like I'd much rather someone comes up to me and be like, that was pathetic because the X, Y, and Z. Like
Mm.
great, X, Y, and Z, you damn right will never happen again. Versus that was pathetic and I'm like, listen, I know that was pathetic, but that doesn't help me because I don't know what was pathetic about that. Now
Mm.
I'm going to wallow in how pathetic I am and I can't get better. And I'm not saying that'll happen, but I'm just more so meaning like I'll figure out what's pathetic, but it's
Mm.
not, that doesn't help me at all.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, I think that is probably how I would think about it. If you know,
Makes sense.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm asking too many questions. We're taking too much of your time.
dude, come
What?
on. This is my time. This is your time. I haven't asked
What?
you any questions. I should be the one apologizing.
Nah, don't say that.
Come on.
Working in a fast-paced kind of like growing startup like Ramp
Yeah.
um, is quite exciting. So, like, what aspects of this environment? Because I know you personally. I know you're very much like you like working really hard and you like the dynamic environment. So, besides that, what aspects of this environment excite you the most? Actually, before we even talk about that, can you tell us what Ramp is, like what Ramp does?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think people are like at this point.
a little bit late, just slightly late.
They're like, what is it that he does? He sells crypto. I sell NFTs to online galleries. Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't even know what an NFT is at this point.
It's not
Yeah,
in there anymore.
it's not.
No, I mean, I feel like last time I heard it was like 4 years ago when Gary Vee was talking about it. But
What a character. Yeah, no. I started to derail things a bit. I would say, okay, so Ramp. What is it?
yeah,
And why do we exist? I mean, it's an amazing platform. Like it is truly, in my view, a generational company, generational people that comprise it. Basically, for a lot of modern growing scaling businesses, the traditional setup that teams often face, it sounds salesy even me saying this, but they're using a legacy corporate card through an Amex as an example, where it might the basic setup is that they have points, right? Like an Amex program has a point system that convolutes and gamifies spend. So it incentivizes businesses to spend more using the corporate card. And there's no software component that makes it easier for employees to capture expenses. So the reason that matters is because accounting teams have to then purchase an SAP Concur, which for context is like a behemoth expense software that costs tens of thousands of dollars a year, where employees hate it because if I'm filling out an expense report, I have to take time out of my day, literally type away 30 minutes to an hour, again, slight exaggeration, filling out a spreadsheet basically on why, like basically the expense, whatever I've expensed for the company using a corporate card that I've been given, right, as an employee. And the reason that matters is because there tends to be friction when employees don't fill out expense reports between them and the accounting team that has to chase them down for receipts and all the information that's needed. So there ends up being a snowball effect. There ends up being a lot of negative outcomes alongside that, creating lags in reporting, an inability for executives to make more informed business decisions because if employees aren't filling out expense reports, now they can't close their books, produce monthly financials in a timely fashion, and things spiral out of control very quickly. So there's a domino effect that happens downstream. And on top of that, there's no controls in place when an employee has a corporate card because they can go spend willy-nilly without accounting teams being able to enforce anything. So what Ramp does really spans consolidation of a lot of disparate systems, corporate cards, expense management, how teams pay their bills under one platform, where the outcomes that one drives are better savings, so controls within the card that say employees can spend as they should and not as they shouldn't, higher cash back than what a lot of teams are used to, automation around expense reports, eliminating that process altogether. So it's basically having a smart card that automatically captures receipts and all of the other expense information that employees no longer have to submit. and driving real-time visibility and real-time reporting that a lot of finance and accounting teams are beholden to, waiting for employees or using a bank statement to see how it's been tracking at any given point, which is happening after the fact. So, bit of a ramble, but really where the what Ramp does again is you can almost think of it in layman terms as a smart card that eliminates expense reports and provides automation for a faster close for accounting teams, real-time visibility for folks on the financial and executive side.
I see. And you've been in the fintech industry so for a while now. What are the best ways for a fintech startup to remain competitive in such a dynamic and competitive environment? And do you see any kind of significant opportunities for growth or innovation from your experiences? Do you see like any kind of pain areas that can be improved with new fintech technologies?
These are fantastic questions that I'm a knuckle dragger. I don't know if I'm the best I don't know if I'm the best person equipped to answer this on the computer, but I'll take a stab at answering that regardless. Yeah, I mean, look, I think the biggest it's a very saturated space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a ton of competitors that are trying to do the same as a system like a Ramp. I think our bet is managing all outflows that a business even has to deal with outside of payroll, which is its own behemoth as like an industry. So everything that I just chatted through across corporate cards, expense management, accounts payable, how companies pay bills, we're really looking to expand into other arenas, into other verticals that help teams just better manage spend at scale. There's certain things that like preclude me from saying like what those actually are and what they actually entail. But for all intents and purposes, like I think I in speaking specific to Ramp, like I think what's allowed us to be right now like the fastest growing corporate card in America is we're just focused on saving companies' most important assets, being time and money. Shaving down the manual and tedious hours, right, that amount from the snowball effect when employees don't fill out expense reports and accounting teams have to chase them down for key information, down to a few minutes in a fully automated fashion, and taking a lot of the, wasted spend, right, where employees are spending out of policy and putting those controls and guardrails and restrictions in place to say, like, you can only spend on specific categories outside of which, as a card is being given, it's declined. And getting better cash back. And so, like, I think I can only really speak to Ramp. Like, I'm not, I don't know that I can sit here and say, like, across the fintech space, like, these are the broader trends that I'm seeing. But I think we had a conversation earlier about like culture and about identity, and I think that is like the mission at the company is grow without fear. And I think if we're just keenly focused on like being super ambitious, being super goal oriented, and our head of product even said recently in like all hands, he was like I think it was like something like success or ambition is having, or I can't remember. It was like ambition is like having a plan with not enough time or something. And so I think that just like carries over to like a lot of what people are doing day to day at the company in order to like grow it to what it's becoming and continuing its like rocket ship start. So that was, I think, sort of a political answer that veered off in a bunch of different directions. That wasn't probably the most helpful, but that's like what I would say specific to like Ramp and that trajectory specifically.
This conversation was really interesting and fascinating. I know we talked I feel like I digressed a bit with some side questions, but we're coming towards the end of the episode, so I'm just going to ask you. I guess I'm curious because I know you. I know you're very, and we exchange, like books and ideas and ourselves too. So I'm curious, what resources would you recommend to our viewers for your personal and professional growth that have been really helpful in terms of podcasts, be it websites, books, whatever,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think COVID, I read Can't Hurt Me, David Goggins. They just changed like everything. Like that book was a game changer. Reading like about his life story and about his philosophy to just like leading and being just a savage was probably honestly like the most formative book I read. Probably that and like his podcast with Joe Rogan. The two that he had, I think he's done 2 or 3 at this point. There's
Mm.
one with Huberman too that I just think like with someone like that who's like pushed himself to the absolute brink and limit of like what a human is capable of achieving, who like completed a 100-mile race on broken legs, who broke the world record for pull-ups in a day, that had all of these ailments and illnesses to deal with on top of that, was able to say, excuse my French, but like fuck that, like I don't care about that. I'm gonna circumvent and overcome no matter what. I think we can all garner some level of inspiration from, especially given he talks about his trials and tribulations about, in not being the most self-confident and not being having the highest self-esteem and building that up through just grueling, tough discipline that, one brings into your daily practice. So I think that is like probably the book that has been the most resonant for me, at least. Yeah, up until now.
Any sales specific resources you used?
Let's see. Actually, I have a good book called Never Split the Difference.
Mm.
It's a great book. It's about like the art of negotiation and like how to, and it's easier to like read than put it into practice, but basically like a lot of the skills that you inherently have, right? Like throughout the conversation today, you were mirroring, which is like repeating back to somebody what they say to show that you're listening, being active listening, asking and labeling, like saying it sounds like when there's a key emotion that another party is shared. And then, of course, like being calm and confident and always coming into any situation with a prepared goal and outcome in mind that you have. I'm like oversimplifying a ton the main thesis of like the book, but it gives you the tools across interpersonal skills in order to like lead compelling, thoughtful discussions with people that get them, sounds a little bit manipulative, to do what you want, basically. To, like buy your product, to, get out of you having to like do the chores in the house that your mom is asking you to do. I'm using real examples, by the way, right? Like these are all things that like I'm like I've tried to negotiate myself out of, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. Sorry, mom, I love you. But these are that is like the sort of goal of the book, is to like just teach you the art of negotiation, because everything at the end of the day, as he tells it, is a negotiation.
Nice. Yeah, it was super interesting. And, I find it really interesting. I hope our viewers find it interesting too. It's the end of our episode. So I guess my final question would be, if you do have any words for our viewers, final advice, any words you want to say or share.
Yeah. Subscribe, link to the podcast down below. If you guys aren't already, every single person in your network should know about the Javed Alizada podcast. And I'm not just saying that. And if you don't find it compelling enough, trust me, I will. I'll have a team of BDRs reach out to you.
Personal sales pitch.
You're gonna be getting a cold call or cold email.
That was the entire point of the episode, just to get a cold call at the end.
So no, but in all seriousness, like, it was such a pleasure, and like, it was super like, I think like what you're doing for all the viewers, for all the listeners, to just like bring people on, and I exclude myself from this conversation, by the way. I'm a complete knuckle dragger idiot that doesn't know much about anything. So the fact that I'm even on here, again, I really appreciate the charity work that you're doing.
Oh, come on.
But in all seriousness, no, I think what I would leave folks with is, just spread the word, spread the love, get other people to listen to what you're doing, because it's honestly amazing, and I think everyone deserves to know. So, yeah, man, that's probably how I leave things, just as a big thank you, and
I really appreciate it for your kind words, and thank you so much for your time.
Dude,
this was Kayvon Gorji on the episode, and yeah, have a great evening. Enjoy your Saturday. That's a way to go. That's a way to go. That's a way to end it. Take care, brother.
Take care.